We are going to do something highly specific today. And look, it requires a certain mindset.
Yeah.
Usually, when you look at a massive public reform program, say, $1 billion initiative stretching across years, impacting millions of lives, you look at the human outcomes.
Right.
You look at the press conferences. You look at the ribbon cutting, the solemn speeches, the grand announcements.
Yes, the public-facing narrative.
Exactly. But today, our mission for you is entirely different. We are going to conduct a forensic document walkthrough. We are going to look exclusively at the paperwork.
Just the paper trail.
Right. We are going to examine, piece by piece, how a massive public reform program loses its scoreboard right in plain sight.
Precisely.
Mhm.
And I think it is crucial to establish right at the outset the strict boundaries of what we are doing here for you today.
Yeah, let's lay down the ground rules.
We are not looking for a sensational conspiracy. We are not relying on anonymous leaks. We are not bringing you whistleblowers or hidden microphones or secret emails.
None of that.
No. Every single fact, every date, every quotation, and every bureaucratic maneuver we discuss today is drawn directly from the Queensland Government's own published public-facing materials.
Which is what makes it so fascinating.
It is. We are looking at tabled parliamentary papers, published departmental web pages, and the formal public statements of the government itself. We are examining what we might call the architecture of silence.
The architecture of silence. I mean, I love that phrasing. It is a fascinating paper trail. And honestly, as we walk through it, you will see it is the perfect bureaucratic trap.
It really is a study in administrative mechanics.
Because our goal for you today is to unpack the exact structural mechanism that allows a government to entirely dismantle independent oversight without ever breaking a promise.
Right, without ever breaching a contract.
And without ever announcing a closure to the public.
It is about how the system operates when nobody is forcing it to be loud.
Exactly. So to understand how you make a multi-million-dollar watchdog just vanish into thin air, we have to go back to the moment it was conceived.
We need to look at the foundational documents.
Right. The date is December 2nd, 2021. Set the scene for us. What is happening in the paper trail on this exact date?
Well, on that date, the Women's Safety and Justice Taskforce delivered a landmark document known as Hear Her Voice, Report 1.
Okay.
And we need to pause to appreciate the scale of this document. This is not a pamphlet.
No, it's massive.
It is a massive undertaking, 3 volumes, nearly 1,000 pages, detailing deep systemic failures across the government apparatus.
It represents thousands of hours of testimony, research, and legal analysis.
Yes. And at the end of this monumental 1,000-page report, there are 89 specific recommendations for reform.
Right, 89 recommendations. Now, if you take the time to read through the first 87 of those recommendations, they're exactly what you would expect from a report of this magnitude, targeting this specific area of systemic failure.
They are the operational changes.
Yeah, they are about the mechanics of changing the system. They cover the criminalization of coercive control, the reforming of police responses, the restructuring of court handling.
The training of legal professionals and the direct funding of frontline services.
Exactly. They are the gears and levers of public policy. But then you reach the very end of Volume 3, the final 2 recommendations.
Recommendations 88 and 89.
I want to stop here because this is where the paper trail gets really interesting. These 2 recommendations aren't about domestic violence policy at all.
No, they are not.
They aren't about police or courts or frontline services. They are entirely 100% about measurement.
Measurement and accountability.
Let's look at the exact wording from the document. Recommendation 88 asks the Queensland Government to establish a suitably qualified independent implementation supervisor.
An independent supervisor, yes.
And Recommendation 89 asks that the biannual reports of the supervisor be tabled in the Queensland Parliament within 14 days of receipt until implementation is complete.
I want you to really isolate those parameters in your mind, because in the context of government administration, they are incredibly strict.
How so? Walk us through the strictness of it.
Let's break them down. First, a report every 6 months, biannual.
Okay, so a regular cadence.
Second, it must be tabled in the Parliament within a 14-day window of receipt.
That is a very tight turnaround for a bureaucracy.
It is an intentionally tight window. And third, a definitive, unyielding end condition. The phrase is, until implementation is complete.
So it doesn't just sunset after a year.
No, it stays until the job is done. Now, Margaret McMurdo, a retired Court of Appeal president, chaired this task force.
A judge.
A very senior judge. She authored a 1,000-page report on systemic reform, and the very last thing she asked for, the capstone of the entire endeavor, was an unyielding public scoreboard.
Which brings us to the motive. The question we have to ask forensically is why?
Exactly.
I want to push on that. Why is the placement of these two recommendations at the very end of a massive document so vital to understanding the task force's mindset?
It is vital because you don't just tack on a rigid reporting structure as an afterthought.
It feels deliberate.
It is entirely deliberate. To understand the paperwork, you have to understand the history of the paperwork.
Right.
Margaret McMurdo was not writing into a historical vacuum. 6 years earlier, in 2015, another landmark report had been delivered on the exact same subject.
Right. I remember.
It was called Not Now, Not Ever. It contained 140 recommendations.
Okay.
And by October 2019, the government of the day had published documents declaring every single one of those 140 recommendations as delivered. Finished.
So they claimed a 100% success rate.
Yes. A major milestone achieved. The bureaucratic books were closed.
But wait, if 140 recommendations were delivered and finalized in 2019, why is McMurdo's task force sitting down with women across Queensland in 2021 writing a 1,000-page report?
That is the pivotal question.
If the system was fixed, what is the task force investigating? They're hearing that the exact same system is failing them in the exact same ways.
Precisely. That is the crucial context. McMurdo had watched at close range what the bureaucratic process of acceptance actually does.
What it actually means in practice.
Yes. She had seen a government accept 140 recommendations, announce their completion to the public, and preside over a system that did not fundamentally change its outcomes for the people relying on it.
Wow, okay.
She understood a fundamental, cold truth about government machinery. The announcement often becomes the product.
Say that again? The announcement becomes the product.
The press release is the reform. The act of saying you are doing something replaces the act of doing it.
Okay, let me try to map this onto something outside of government bureaucracy. It makes me think of playing a high-stakes sport like a championship game.
Okay, I follow.
But there is no referee on the field, and there is no scoreboard bolted to the stadium wall.
Right.
The players just run around on the grass for 2 hours, and instead of looking at a definitive score at the end of the game, the teams just walk out to the midfield, grab a microphone, and announce to the crowd who won.
They just assert the outcome.
You just have to take their word for it. They issue a press release saying, "We scored 140 points today. The game is delivered."
That is a highly accurate way to frame it.
So McMurdo didn't want the teams announcing the score anymore. She wanted a referee on the grass, and she wanted the scoreboard bolted to the wall where everyone in the stadium could see the numbers tick over.
That's it, exactly. The referee is the independent supervisor.
Right.
The scoreboard is the biannual report tabled in Parliament. She asked for an independent invigilator and a public number because she knew exactly what happens to a reform program that nobody outside the building is counting.
The compliance just becomes internal.
Without external measurement, internal compliance becomes a box-ticking exercise. She tried to mandate transparency to forcefully ensure the outcomes on the ground matched the announcements at the podium.
So she sets the trap. She builds the scoreboard into the final two recommendations. She demands the math.
Yes.
But how does a government handle a request for a strict, unyielding measurement system? You can't exactly hold a press conference and say no to transparency, right?
Politically, that is impossible.
You can't reject the final two recommendations of a 1,000-page report without looking like you have something to hide. So what does the paper trail show?
They agree to the sentiment, but they rewrite the rules of the game.
Let's move our timeline forward to May 10th, 2022. The government publishes its official response to the task force.
It was a very comprehensive response document. If you read the headlines from that day, the government accepted or supported all 89 recommendations.
A clean sweep.
Not a single one was rejected. They announced a massive $363 million funding package.
That is a lot of money.
They set up the entire architecture of reform across multiple departments. It looked, on paper and in the press, like total capitulation to the task force's demands.
But this is a forensic deep dive. We don't read the headlines, we read the fine print.
And the fine print is where the architecture changes.
Exactly. When you look closely at the government's official response to recommendations 88 and 89, you see something very specific. They weren't just supported.
No, they were marked with a distinct phrase, supported in principle.
Okay, stop here. I need to unpack this. If I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, isn't supported in principle, just standard political speak for, we agree with you, but give us a minute to figure out the logistics of how we actually fund and staff this.
It sounds perfectly reasonable.
Right. It sounds like a polite agreement, like we're on the same page, we just need to draft the budget.
That is exactly how it is generally perceived by the public, and that is why it is such an effective bureaucratic tool.
Because it sounds like a yes.
It functions rhetorically as an agreement, but forensically, administratively, it is a lethal swap.
A lethal swap. Explain that.
It is not a weaker yes. It is an entirely different instrument altogether. Let's look at the actual text of the government's response to Recommendation 89.
Okay.
Remember, McMurdo asked for a hard obligation. Table the independent reports in Parliament within 14 days until implementation is complete.
Right. A date, a deadline, a recipient, and an end condition. A binding contract.
Right. Now, here's what the government committed to instead in their official published response document.
I'm listening.
I will quote the paperwork directly. The government stated it would write its own annual report on its progress, and it would, quote, consider options for reporting by the implementation supervisor, end quote.
Wait. Consider options.
Consider options. That is the exact phrase.
They took a hard, mandatory obligation to table an independent audit in the Parliament, and they swapped it for an internal agreement to consider options for reporting.
That is exactly what the paperwork shows.
Let me make sure I'm fully grasping the gravity of this. They didn't just delay the scoreboard. They changed the definition of what they were agreeing to.
They altered the fundamental legal requirement.
They took a legally binding 14-day tabling requirement and replaced it with the verb consider.
Yes.
You cannot breach a commitment to consider something. If you think about it for 5 seconds over a cup of coffee and decide against it, you have successfully fulfilled your commitment to consider options.
Exactly. This is the brilliance of the bureaucracy.
It's bulletproof.
The escape hatch wasn't improvised under pressure in 2025 when things got difficult or when budgets got tight.
No, it was right there at the start.
It was drafted, cleared by legal, approved by cabinet, and published 4 years before anyone needed to use it.
Wow.
They built the escape hatch into the very same document that announced the $363 million and celebrated the acceptance of the report.
So no promise had to be broken later on because the promise was deliberately built not to bind in the first place.
Precisely.
The government accepted the sentiment of the recommendation, the broad public idea of oversight, but they meticulously, quietly removed the hard obligation.
And this is the core mechanism of the architecture we are exploring.
The substitution of sentiment for obligation.
Once you remove the structural obligation to table a report in Parliament, you control the timeline, you control the format, and ultimately you control the very existence of the oversight itself.
Because it's no longer a rule, it's just a preference.
The supervisor ceases to be an independent referee and becomes a guest of the government, operating at their discretion.
So they've executed the swap, they've traded a hard deadline for a vague sentiment, they've given themselves a permanent out.
An administrative out.
But that just means they don't have to table the reports. How does the government get the measurement off its desk entirely? How do you permanently solve the problem of a watchdog looking over your shoulder for a decade?
You declare its job finished.
Which brings us to the next major document in the trail. May 2024. A document called the Women's Safety and Justice Reform, Second Annual Report 2023-24.
This is a crucial document for our investigation. It was tabled in the Queensland Parliament.
Tabled in Parliament, that is a vital detail that we need to linger on for a moment.
It is the most important detail.
A tabled parliamentary paper is the strongest, most rigid source we can examine. Unlike a web page, which can be quietly edited, archived, or updated overnight by an IT department, a tabled document is a permanent, fixed record of the government's official position.
It is entered into the parliamentary record. It has legal and administrative weight. It binds the department's accounting.
It's the official ledger.
Yes.
And inside this report, this permanent record, there is a status column, a tabular layout tracking the progress of the hundreds of recommendations.
The literal checklist.
We look down the rows to Recommendation 88, we look at Recommendation 89, and we look at Recommendation 188 from the second Taskforce report, which had basically reaffirmed the whole oversight arrangement.
And what does the status column say?
In that official status column, all 3 of these oversight recommendations are marked with the exact same phrase. Delivered in 2022-23.
Delivered.
Delivered.
I want to urge you to think about the sheer bureaucratic audacity of that accounting.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
A massive, complex, decade-long reform program is just getting underway. The ink is barely dry on the funding packages.
Right.
The originating recommendations explicitly dictate that an independent supervisor must monitor this entire program until implementation is complete.
Which is years away.
And yet, the oversight mechanism for this massive multi-year program is officially booked as complete in its very first year.
I have to stop you again because this makes absolutely no sense in the real world. Let me go back to an analogy.
Please do.
If I hire a building inspector to make sure my new house is built to code, the inspector's job isn't delivered the day they sign the contract.
No, of course not.
It's not delivered the day they buy a hard hat or set up their office. The job is delivered when the building is finished, when the final brick is laid and the final inspection is passed.
That is the logical human understanding of delivery.
Right. If the builder tells me, great news, the foundation isn't poured yet, but the oversight of the construction was delivered last year, I would think they had lost their mind.
It sounds absurd.
It is absurd. How does this logic survive in a tabled parliamentary document? How can they claim the oversight is complete before the work being overseen has barely started?
It survives because in the architecture of government, words have different meanings than they do in your analogy.
Okay.
They are treating the recommendation not as a continuous lived duty, but as a discrete, one-time administrative action.
A single event.
Exactly. On the basis that an office for the supervisor had been physically opened, a budget allocated, and a person appointed to the role, the bureaucracy ticked the box.
They just looked at the verb.
They looked at the task, established a supervisor, and said, we established one. Task complete.
Even though the point of the supervisor is to supervise.
The mechanism is established, but the legal and bureaucratic reality of that status column is profound, and it is the key to everything that follows.
Explain that reality to me. What happens the moment that box is ticked in the official ledger?
You cannot abandon a recommendation you have already recorded as delivered.
Because there's nothing left to do.
The ledger is closed.
There is no obligation left to breach.
Exactly. The scoreboard was never treated as an ongoing moral duty that bound the government to public accountability over 10 years.
It was just a hurdle to clear.
It was treated as a singular box on a compliance checklist. That box was officially permanently ticked in the 2022 to 23 financial year.
Wow.
And once it is marked delivered in a parliamentary paper, everything that the supervisor's office does afterward is technically, legally optional.
Optional.
The government has already fulfilled its administrative requirement on paper. It has zero outstanding obligations regarding those recommendations.
Okay, let me get this straight. On paper, the obligation is wiped clean in 2023.
Yes.
But in the physical world, what happens to the actual office of the watchdog? Because there is still a person sitting at a desk, drawing a salary, doing the work.
Correct.
In March 2023, after a national search, a permanent independent implementation supervisor was appointed.
Yes. And we should note that at the time of that physical appointment, the relevant minister made a very clear, forceful public statement.
What did they say?
The minister stated that with investment exceeding $1 billion, it was vital that there be independent oversight to ensure the reforms achieve their intended results. Vital is their chosen word. They explicitly understood and communicated to the public the necessity of the function.
And for a while, the office did exactly what it was supposed to do. It produced 5 biannual progress reports running right up until November 2024.
5 detailed reports, yes.
And we need to be explicitly clear for you here, listening to this. Those records were not destroyed. We aren't talking about a malicious cover-up where files were taken down to the basement and shredded.
No, not at all.
Those 5 reports remain publicly available online right now. You can go read them. The office did its job, analyzed the data, and published its findings.
But then the flow of information abruptly stops. The paper trail hits a wall.
What happens?
On February 20th, 2025, the Office of the Independent Implementation Supervisor was closed.
Just closed.
Just closed. And this is where the architecture of silence truly reveals itself.
How was it handled publicly?
There was no public announcement of the closure.
None.
None. There was no ministerial press release championing a change in direction. There was no statement made to the Parliament explaining why the independent oversight of a billion-dollar reform program, which they previously called vital, was being terminated.
It just vanished.
It just ceased to exist.
It's like quietly unplugging the security cameras in a bank vault. And when someone finally notices months later and asks what happened to the security, you just point to a procurement logbook from 2 years ago that says, cameras successfully purchased.
Box ticked. Task delivered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You ask, how does a multi-million-dollar watchdog just vanish without a press release? You would think the opposition would notice. You would think the media would notice. How does it happen in total silence?
Well, if you connect it back to our analysis of the status column, it makes perfect sense.
Right, the early delivery.
Why was no announcement needed? Why would you issue a press release? Because, according to the official paperwork tabled in Parliament, nothing was being closed.
Oh, of course.
The recommendation to establish oversight had already been marked delivered 2 years prior.
So administratively, it's a non-event.
You do not need to announce the closure of an office that, administratively speaking, finished its mandatory purpose in 2023.
The silence is the procedure.
The silent closure in 2025 was entirely authorized and practically guaranteed by the early delivery marked in 2023.
They didn't kill the watchdog in 2025. They just stopped feeding an animal they officially marked as obsolete 2 years earlier.
That is exactly what happened.
So the office vanishes in February 2025. What happens to the flow of information that the public and Margaret McMurdo were supposed to receive?
We enter the void.
Since that final report was published in November 2024, 3 full reporting cycles have fallen due. Roughly May 2025, November 2025, and May 2026.
That represents a 20-month gap of absolute silence.
20 months.
A total blackout of independent data regarding the progress of the reforms. The scoreboard hasn't just been turned off. It has been physically unbolted and removed from the stadium.
Now, if you go digging through the department's website today to find out what happened, if you try to trace the digital paper trail, you start to notice the structural tells.
The digital footprints.
Right. The footprints of the bureaucracy adjusting to the new reality. The web page for the supervisor still exists, but look at the URL, the web address itself.
What does the pad say?
It files the supervisor under a path that contains the words "r dash past dash progress."
Past progress.
And the page itself now has a newly added heading that labels the supervisor as former.
We must apply strict analytical rigor here and avoid jumping to conspiracy.
Right, let's be careful.
A defender of the government, any public servant, would look at that URL and say, this is entirely standard website housekeeping.
Which is fair.
When an office is decommissioned, you move its assets to the archive section and you label the personnel former.
That makes administrative sense.
And they would be entirely correct. It is standard housekeeping. We are not pointing to the URL as proof of malicious intent to hide the truth.
It's not a smoking gun of a cover-up, but it acts as a tell.
Yes, it is a tell because the website's URL architecture knew the office was history before the public was ever informed.
The metadata updated before the press did.
The department's own digital filing system had already categorized the independent watchdog as a relic of the past, as past progress, while the reform program it was supposed to monitor was still actively spending hundreds of millions of dollars in the present.
The building knew the oversight was dead before a press release was ever considered.
Precisely.
So the independent supervisor is filed under past progress. But surely, for a billion-dollar program, somebody is watching the money.
You would expect so.
Somebody has to be measuring the outcomes. If you look at the live governance page on the website today, it still boasts about independent oversight of the reform agenda. It uses the word independent prominently.
It does use that word.
But when you look at the committees, it actually lists beneath that heading, they are made up of internal government directors general, the heads of the departments.
This is a critical semantic distortion of language.
How so?
Recommendation 88 explicitly asked for a supervisor independent of government.
Someone on the outside.
What exists now under the banner of independent oversight are committees composed of the very departmental heads who are responsible for implementing the reforms.
The insiders.
That is not independent oversight. That is self-supervision.
Right.
It is the exact inverse of independence, wearing the name of independence to provide a veneer of accountability to anyone casually browsing the website.
The people grading the homework are the exact same people doing the homework. They are invigilating their own exam.
Exactly.
And meanwhile, there's another page on the site regarding a broader monitoring framework. We checked the metadata on this page. It was modified on May 21st, 2026.
That is 15 months after the independent office was closed.
15 months, and the page states that the department is still, quote, working towards establishing a framework for monitoring and reporting.
Working toward.
Working towards.
15 months later, the replacement for the watchdog is still just a verb.
It's an aspiration.
It is a concept, They are working towards it. It is not delayed. It is not partially operational. It is not in beta testing. It simply does not exist yet.
Let that sink in.
Let me put this in perspective.
Yeah.
You have a reform program carrying 277 recommendations from multiple reports, backed by over $1 billion in public funding, operating in an environment where absolutely nobody outside the building is counting anything.
Nothing at all.
And the internal replacement is still just an idea on a web page, 15 months after the independent mechanism was destroyed.
And to make the bureaucratic maze even more impenetrable, to ensure that tracing accountability is as difficult as possible, they split the portfolios.
Yes, the portfolio split.
The duty to actually table the overarching report in Parliament sits with the Justice Department. But the archived web record of the former supervisor sits with the Families Department.
The bureaucratic perfection of this split cannot be overstated.
It's structurally brilliant.
The duty to report and the historical record of reporting live in entirely different buildings, managed by different teams under different budgets.
So they are completely divorced from each other.
So if a journalist or a member of the public or an auditor wants to ask the simple question, why did the independent reports stop?
Where do they go?
There is no single desk where that question lands.
Right.
If you ask the Families Department, they will accurately point out that the tabling obligation legally belongs to Justice.
And if you ask Justice,
They will accurately point you to the archived website over at Families, noting they don't manage the supervisor.
wow.
The accountability falls into the structural void between the two departments.
So if we step back and look at the whole board, what does this all mean for the actual reforms? We have a massive program, hundreds of recommendations, $1 billion committed, and nobody outside the building is counting anything.
Nothing is independently verified.
The duty to report has evaporated in the space between two departments. The original mandate was quietly swapped for consider options, then marked delivered in year 1, authorizing a silent closure in year 3.
That is the sequence.
In this total vacuum of independent data, how does the government measure its own success or failure? How do they tell the public they are winning?
By political assertion.
Political assertion.
When you remove the instrument of objective measurement, the only thing left is politics. Which brings us to a very revealing date, August 28th, 2025.
What happens on August 28th?
On this date, the government issued a forceful media statement. In it, they claimed that under their predecessor, hundreds of reform recommendations had been left gathering dust.
Gathering dust. Let's dissect the timing and the logic of that statement, because it is staggering when you lay it out chronologically.
It is entirely contradictory.
This claim that the previous administration failed to implement reforms was made exactly 6 months after the current government quietly closed the very office responsible for measuring whether recommendations were being implemented or whether they were, in fact, gathering dust.
This is the core contradiction of the entire affair, and it highlights why the scoreboard is so vital.
Because you have no metrics to back up the claim.
You cannot audit your predecessor with an instrument that you yourself abolished.
Right.
The claim that recommendations were ignored might be entirely true. It might be entirely false. But the only mechanism designed to definitively prove it, the independent implementation supervisor, was dismantled by the very people making the claim.
Let's go back to an analogy. It's like throwing away your tape measure, stepping back, looking at a wall, and declaring loudly to the room that your predecessor built the wall crooked.
A perfect parallel.
Nobody in the room can prove you wrong because you are the only one who had the tape measure and you threw it in the bin. But nobody can prove you right either.
The data is gone.
You've intentionally removed the ability to verify the claim. You've replaced measurement with volume.
Exactly. Political assertions thrive in a data vacuum.
They rely on it.
An assertion that cannot be checked, made by the party that explicitly removed the ability to check it, is not an accountability claim.
What is it then?
It is a political assertion dressed up in the grammar of accountability. It uses the language of measurement claims of things gathering dust, implications of stalled progress, to disguise the profound absence of actual measurement.
And we can see this exact dynamic, this exact architectural maneuver playing out again right now with new paperwork.
The cycle repeats itself.
Bring in the Anastasia Commission final report. This was delivered on May 22nd, 2026. This was another major, highly public inquiry, delivering 52 new urgent recommendations into the exact same department.
And how did the government respond in their official paperwork to these new 52 recommendations?
They promised to carefully consider every recommendation.
I want you to note the verb, consider.
There it is again.
Not implement, not mandate. Consider. It is the exact same grammatical maneuver that gave us consider options for reporting 4 years earlier.
It's the same escape hatch.
And crucially, because the independent supervisor was closed 15 months prior, there's currently no independent instrument in that department capable of reporting to the Parliament if a single one of those 52 new Anastasio recommendations is ever actually implemented.
So the vacuum remains intact.
The vacuum remains intact. The system is ready to swallow another 52 recommendations without leaving a trace.
This brings us to the ultimate chilling conclusion of how this entire administrative machinery functions.
The architecture of silence in its entirety.
Let's synthesize everything we've looked at today. Let's walk the listener through it, sequentially, step by step. Let's look at how a government accepts a sentiment while entirely removing the obligation.
Step 1. You accept all 89 recommendations of the landmark report.
You announce the massive funding package.
You hold a press conference, you stand at the podium, and you take the photograph. You establish the unassailable public narrative of total commitment to reform.
That's the public face. Step 2. You take the 2 specific recommendations that would actually measure your progress, the ones that build the scoreboard, and you support them in principle.
Yes. In the fine print of the response text, far away from the press conference, you quietly swap the hard legal obligation to table independent reports for a vague, unenforceable promise to consider options.
Step 3. You briefly open an office, you hire a supervisor, and then you immediately mark the oversight recommendations as delivered in 2022-23 in a formal, tabled parliamentary report.
You book the lifetime oversight of a 10-year program as administratively complete in year 1.
Step 4. Because the recommendation is technically marked as delivered on the official ledger, the obligation is finished.
So 3 years later, you simply close the office.
No public announcement is required because, according to the paperwork, no rule is being broken. On paper, you fulfilled the duty long ago.
Step 5. With the independent data flow completely severed, with the scoreboard dismantled, you enter the political arena and campaign on the resulting uncheckable count.
You accuse your predecessors of leaving reforms to gather dust, safe in the absolute knowledge that no independent body exists to either verify or refute your claims.
That is the complete maneuver.
Why go through this elaborate dance? Why not just say no?
Because rejection creates a record.
Right.
Rejection is expensive. If you reject recommendation 88 publicly, if you say, no, we will not fund an independent supervisor, you have to defend that choice forever.
It's a permanent liability.
Every time the system fails, every time a tragedy occurs, someone in the media or the opposition will point to your rejection document and say, this is why. You refuse to build a scoreboard.
But support in principle is free.
That is the core thesis of this investigation. Look at the sequence we just outlined.
Yeah.
Every single step in this sequence was affirmative. Every step was published. Every step is technically legally defensible on its own terms.
It's all incredibly polite on paper.
No one in the bureaucracy ever wrote the word no. The government simply said yes in a way that meant absolutely nothing.
The only thing missing at the very end of the process is the actual oversight.
Exactly.
It's a bureaucratic masterpiece. It's a flawless execution of administrative evasion. And what's wild is that we see this exact instrument used elsewhere. This isn't an isolated incident.
It is a standard operational procedure.
Briefly, let's look at another massive scheme. The Victorian Historical Forced Adoptions Redress Scheme.
A very relevant comparison.
This is the only scheme of its kind in Australia. It is heavily funded, designed to provide apologies and financial compensation for horrific historical practices. But it is open only to the mothers. It quietly excludes the adopted people, the infants who the act was actually performed upon. How does a scheme about adoption exclude the adopted people without causing a massive public outcry?
Because the mechanism is identical to what we've seen today.
They just wrote it out of the paperwork.
The originating parliamentary inquiry into forced adoptions heard harrowing testimony from both mothers and adopted people. Both groups were central to the findings.
Okay.
But as the scheme moved from the inquiry phase to the bureaucratic design phase, only one category survived into the final eligibility criteria.
The mothers.
Yes. Nobody in the government ever issued a public statement rejecting the adoptees. There was no debate in Parliament about excluding them, no formal refusal document for advocacy groups to appeal.
So they just vanished.
They were simply, quietly resolved out of the eligibility criteria through the drafting of the paperwork.
The silence is the mechanism.
Precisely. The schema itself is the confession. You don't need a document explicitly saying, no, we won't help you. when the structural architecture of the system functionally excludes them from applying.
Just like you don't need a document saying we are abolishing oversight when the system administratively marks it delivered and turns off the lights.
Exactly right.
So looking at all this paperwork, looking at the meticulous way these traps are set, I have to ask a final philosophical question.
Okay.
We look at this 5-step sequence. We look at the swapped language, the premature delivered status, the silent closure, the split portfolios. Is this malice?
Malice.
Is this a grand, calculated conspiracy by politicians sitting in a smoke-filled room, deliberately plotting to hide their inevitable failures from the public?
It is highly likely that it is not a conspiracy at all.
Really? It looks so coordinated.
And frankly, that is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this entire deep dive.
Why is that?
We are not observing cartoon villains. We are observing the maintenance economy on autopilot.
The maintenance economy.
Think about the individual public servants involved in this paper trail. A mid-level bureaucrat ticked a box in 2023 marking the recommendation delivered because an office had indeed physically opened.
They were just doing their job.
Within the incredibly narrow, compliance-driven parameters of their specific job, they were completely correct to do so.
Right, they followed the procedure, they saw an office, they ticked delivered.
Exactly. And 2 years later, a completely different administrator, perhaps in a different department, looked at a budget ledger.
Looking to cut costs.
They saw an office spending millions of dollars. They looked at the parliamentary paper, saw that the foundational recommendation for that office was legally and administratively marked as delivered, and they closed the office to save resources.
Because it looked redundant.
And within their narrow budgetary parameters, they were completely correct to do so.
So everyone is just doing their narrow job.
The system does not require malice to dismantle accountability. It only requires a status column, a vague weaponized phrase like support in principle, and the slow, grinding machinery of standard government procedure.
Just gravity.
The system runs itself. The architecture of silence doesn't need a master architect plotting in the shadows. It just needs the bureaucracy to function normally.
We've taken you on a long, dense journey today, walking through the fine print of government responses, tabled papers, and website archives. We've asked you to care about status columns and URLs.
It is dense, but it is necessary.
But if there is one thing to take away from this deep dive, it is the absolute, unyielding power of reading the fine print.
The devil is in the definitions.
When a government steps up to a podium and says yes, you have to look incredibly closely at the paperwork to see what exactly they are agreeing to.
Because the distance between a press release announcing a billion-dollar reform and the actual lived implementation of that reform is vast.
It is a gulf where good intentions often disappear.
And without an independent scoreboard, without a referee on the field, that distance is entirely invisible to the public.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that builds on everything we've uncovered in these documents today.
What is that?
For years, governments have argued that independent oversight of these kinds of complex, multi-departmental reforms is too difficult.
They claim it is too burdensome.
The state can no longer claim that independent inspectorate oversight is untested. They can no longer claim that it is unaffordable or that it is unproven in this specific context.
No, they cannot.
They built one, they ran it for 2 years, they currently hold 5 volumes of its published output. They know exactly what it costs to run, down to the cent, and they know exactly what kind of data it produces.
They know the mechanism works, they know it provides clarity.
They know it works, and they closed it anyway, and they built absolutely nothing in its place.
Nothing at all.
So the next time a royal commission or a task force demands an independent watchdog to monitor a broken system, and the government steps up to the microphone, smiles, and says, "We support this in principle and will consider options,"
You now know exactly how the trap is set.
you know exactly how the architecture of silence is built.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the paperwork.
We will see you next time.